Hey, 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 AP World History students. I'm Miss Ziegler, the Time Machine teacher, and we are now 4 weeks before the exam. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You have made it to 4 weeks before the exam. Ah, it's so exciting. And we're also on period 4. What's the odds of that? So period 4 is a big one. It's all about exploration and communication and getting these new farming techniques. But before we get into it, make sure you download from the description below the study notes for this time period. Let's get going. The first important thing to note in period 4 happens in around 1515 when we see the Protestant Reformation. This is the first time that people start to question the Catholic Church, specifically Martin Luther. He questions it by saying, hey, is this really what we're supposed to be doing? And the thing that he questions most is paying to get your sins forgiven, which is called indulgences. He didn't think that that was biblical. He writes a 95 thesis, and he questions the Catholic Church, and he basically breaks away from the Catholic Church and does the Protestant Reformation, where he's trying to reform the Catholic Church. Remember, he's so successful because of the printing press. It really gets the word out there and enables people to support him. All right, so do you remember Charlemagne? Well, he tries to unite all of Europe under the Holy Roman Empire, and it's basically city-states that are held loosely together by the Catholic Church. So when the Catholic Church is questioned during the Protestant Reformation, then all of a sudden we have these competing states. That starts the 30 Years' War. And it's fought basically over differences of beliefs in religion as well as national beliefs. That ends with the Peace of Westphalia, and at that point we no longer have a central governing body in Europe. So another reason why Lutheranism becomes so popular is that during the Black Death, people really start to question the Catholic Church, as well as the church scandals such as indulgences in order to pay off your salvation. As a result of questioning the Catholic Church, Henry VIII will eventually break off and start his own church, the Church of England, because remember, the Catholic Church would not let him get divorced. So he does the English Reformation and completely breaks away. Luther's views start the whole idea of political and religion being split, and peasants start to question their status given to them by birth, especially in Germany. Because if the Catholic Church can be questioned, why not the monarchs and the princes? Another big part of the 30 Years' War was actually the rivalry between the Catholics and the Protestants. By the end of the war, it was decided that each sovereign nation would decide their religion on their own. So throughout Europe, we had nations that were Protestant and less Catholic, and nations that were more Catholic and less Protestant. So the Peace of Westphalia is important because it officially starts the nation state versus having these large empires in Europe. So because of this nation state development, now there's more competition between these said nation states. And that brings me to exploration. Now these competing states are also competing to be the first to explore and find the vast riches that are out there in the world. The first exploration that happens actually doesn't start in Europe. Remember, we talked about Zhang He from China? Zhang He explored around 1405 to 1433, mostly in India and East Africa. This led to an exchange of goods between these two areas. During the rule of Kublai Khan in the Yuan dynasty, we see awesome innovations such as the astrolabe and the compass for navigational purposes. The Europeans are going to later use these tools in order to be able to explore themselves. China could have used all of this to be the leading explorers of the world, but they didn't really have a push to do so because they were already strong in their area. They didn't have a lot of competition there, and so they didn't feel the need to really push any further. Marco Polo is among one of the first explorers. He, of course, explores down the Silk Road, meets Kublai Khan, goes all the way to China. His explorations and the things that he brought back leads to Europe's intrigue of what else could possibly be out there. Portugal is leader in exploration, mainly the king's son, Prince Henry the Navigator. He creates a school for explorers. Among them were Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama. Diaz is the explorer who tries to sail around the southern tip of Africa, but his men make him turn around. And then da Gama ends up becoming successful, sailing around the tip of Africa and making it all the way to India. And then we come to Christopher Columbus's Great Voyage. He was commissioned by Spain, specifically King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He really wanted to find a new route to China in order to compete with Portugal. He asked Italy to fund his voyage, and they weren't interested, so that's what led him to Spain. And we know that he discovered the West Indies. Of course, there were people already there. This discovery leads to conflict between Portugal and Spain. They eventually come to an agreement called the Treaty of Tordesillas, which basically splits the land between Spain and Portugal. Cortez comes, conquers the Aztecs, and Pizarro comes and conquers the Incas. That's when Spain discovers the silver, and the silver trade begins. Another important aspect to remember during this time is the Columbian exchange. Once Europeans start coming over and they're exchanging goods between the New World and the Old World, it starts to really change things. It will eventually change the environment of the New World by bringing new plants and animals, and it also changes the diets of the Old World by bringing new foods in. Take a minute, look up some of the things that were exchanged during the Columbian exchange so that you have some notes on that. Another really interesting article to read is the one by National Geographic called Jamestown. I have linked it for you in the comments below so you can check that out. It really explains how the environment was changed by the Europeans coming. And finally, Britain and France get involved in the action, and they're going to explore mostly in North America. We know Britain settles mostly on the coast, and they actually come to colonize. France is more interested in trade, and that's why they have a better relationship with the Native Americans. They're eventually going to move over into the Ohio River Valley and in the northern area as well of Canada. This is also when mercantilism comes into play. This is basically how the wealth of the colonies was governed. It works like this. Colonies are set up. The nation that starts the colony gets the raw resources. The nation manufactures the resources. The nation then sells the manufactured resources back to the colonies and other foreign areas. And then the nation uses the profits to build an army and start more colonies elsewhere. And the process just continues. Mercantilism is a big change factor. It basically enables the American colonies, later on the scramble for Africa, and the colonies in India. So keep that in mind when it comes to changes. During this time frame, we also see several labor systems come into play. We have voluntary, we also have indentured servants. Don't get slavery confused with indentured servitude. It's not the same thing. Indentured servitude was only for a certain time, whereas slavery is for life. So why are so many poor farmers going to America? It starts out with the enclosure movement. That is where large farms in England are buying up smaller farms and enclosing them. They're not sharing the land as they once did. So lower class peasants are kicked off of their land and they're forced to move to urban centers that are oftentimes crowded and not very good living conditions. Many times it was a better opportunity for these small farmers to go to America. If they couldn't afford the trip, that's where indentured servitude comes in. They would offer their labor in exchange for their trip to America. We also discussed during period 4 about how Native Americans didn't make very good slaves, and that's because they knew the land, they were able to escape a lot easier, and they were getting sick a lot from the diseases that the Europeans were bringing over. And that's why, unfortunately, captured Africans were a better solution, because they were already immune to these diseases and they didn't know the land. They were being brought to a foreign country. And unfortunately, African kings were playing right into this because they wanted European weaponry. And so they would trade slaves for European weapons. Their journey over is called the Middle Passage. We discussed the horrible conditions on the Middle Passage that the slaves had to endure in order to even get to the New World. Also, triangular trade comes into play, where they start in Europe, they come down and pick up slaves, and they're bringing manufactured goods over to the New World. In the New World, they would drop off slaves and manufactured goods, pick up raw materials, and go back to Europe. The whole reason that slavery was such a big factor in this is because of mercantilism. The cheaper the labor, the more money you could make. During the 1700s, Britain and France fought a series of wars against each other over the colonies. The French and Indian War was the most famous. Basically, the British colonists wanted to move into the Ohio River Valley and take that land. The French were already there and they said, no, 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 you will not go. And due to this conflict, a war began. The Native Americans were on the side of the French, so the French and Indians fought together against the British. The reason being was because, remember, the French respected the Native Americans more, and the Native Americans thought they might have a better chance if the French won. However, the French did not win, the British did, and so there was increased problems for the Native Americans as the British are moving into the Ohio River Valley. Also, this war leads to the American Revolution as well as the French Revolution because of taxes. Britain and France both had to tax their people more in order to pay for this war. In the case of the American Revolution, that will end with the American colonies being free of British control and having a constitutional government. For the French, it will end with the guillotine and the Reign of Terror, as well as the loss of Haiti as a colony during the Haitian Revolution, which is inspired by the French Revolution. The context of these revolutions, though, is very important. Okay, we have the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, which leads up to the thinking that something should change, that maybe a monarchy is not the best way of governing. This begins in the 1500s with the scientific revolution, where science starts to question the Catholic Church and starts to look at life in a more scientific way. For example, Copernicus comes up with the heliocentric idea that the sun is in the center and the earth rotates around the sun. Galileo invents the first telescope so that he can observe planetary motion. Kepler finds out that planets follow an elliptical pattern, and Isaac Newton comes up with the idea of gravity. We also have the Enlightenment during this time period. So there's a different idea of thinking between the medieval time period and the Enlightenment time period. Medieval is mostly based on Christianity and religious wisdom, whereas the Enlightenment is based more on self-interest and economic thinking. Medieval is more trust in religion and the monarchy to guide you, while Enlightenment is more of self-freedom and self-governing. Freedom to pursue your own business and trade if you so wish. We have several Enlightenment thinkers during this time period that we talked about. One of them that we talked about was John Locke. He's the one that comes up with the idea of natural rights, that everyone is born with these rights that should be protected. His natural rights were life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Remember, we talked about how Thomas Jefferson changes that to the pursuit of happiness. Hobbes is the opposite end of that. He says, no, humans are born nasty and they must be governed by a strong government, such as a monarch. So he's very pro-monarchy, while John Locke is more about freedom. We have Rousseau, who says that it should be based on a social contract between human beings and their government. Voltaire comes up with the separation of church and state and freedom of religion. So some of the basics that come out of the Enlightenment is that humans are neither good or bad. We need a government, but that the government should be more of a self-government type, that people should have a say in this government. That traditions and authority should be challenged, especially if they're doing it wrong. And that citizens should have certain legal rights. Also, some of the philosophers, such as Montesquieu, talk about separation of powers so that one branch of government doesn't have all of the power the way the monarchy does. Separation of church and state comes out of the Enlightenment. We also have new ideas of economics. Adam Smith comes to play here. He applies the scientific revolution and Enlightenment thought to his idea of laissez-faire capitalism, which, remember, is a system of economy in which the government does not intervene. So remember, China is still in a very good place during this time frame because of the silver trade that they had established with Spain and the New World. Also, the three gunpowder empires are flourishing during this time as well in the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire expands into North Africa. This is when the Janissary group grows larger. And at the time, the Ottoman Empire is ruled by the Sunnis. The Safavid Empire, on the other hand, is ruled by the Shiite, and it's in modern-day Iran. It's ruled by the Shah at this time, and he is able to keep the Ottomans from overtaking his empire. Another one of the Gunpowder empires, the Mughal Empire in northern India, is still gaining its wealth from trade on the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade route. And that empire is working to unite Hindus and Muslims who are quite separated in the area. Let's recap period number 4. The first thing that you need to remember is that trade routes become even more important during this time, especially between the Old World and the New World. This expansion leads to slavery, as well as more technological advancements throughout the world. And there are several religious wars that are fought, as well as wars over colonies, which will set the stage for the American and French and Haitian Revolution, which we will talk about in period 5. That's it for period 4. Make sure you finish the rest of the amazing review, A Race to a 5, that's down below in the description. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at timemachineteacher@gmail.com, or you can also put it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much to those who have subscribed already. I really appreciate it. And I will see you next week. Odds of that. I mean, it's just so, it is 4 weeks, right? And the French and the British